gathering tonight on the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara peoples, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all First Nations people joining us today. On behalf of Outer Space and Griffith University Art Museum, we're delighted to partner tonight to bring you this discussion, which focuses on established artists' careers, pathways, and the things that we don't really get to see behind what it takes to make it as an artist, whatever make it looks like to you. For tonight's discussion, I feel very privileged to be in conversation with the one and only Pat Hoffie. Since the 1970s, Pat's immense artistic practice has extended through exhibitions, collaborative cross-disciplinary programming, cross-cultural undertakings, publishing, education, and advocacy. Trained as a painter, her work also extends to sculpture, installation, print media, drawing, and video in the quest to examine power, value, and the importance of place. Throughout tonight's discussion, we strongly encourage your participation, so if you have any questions at the end, the wonderful Alexandra Sloan will be running around with a microphone, so please chuck up your hand, because we'd love for you to be active participants in asking Pat all about her wonderful practice. So, without further ado, Pat, do you want to start by telling us a little bit about the beginnings of your work? What were some of the first artworks that you were making?
Hi, thanks for coming tonight. It is good to be on Turrbal and Yagara land. Thank you for QCAD and Angela Goddard for giving this space, but most importantly, thank you for coming. My first artworks had to do with something that was extremely unpopular at the time, and that was the decorative. Because at that time, the big boy painters, if you like, were doing abstract expressionism and were still in thrall of the field. I had done quite a lot of travelling, and I realised that the kinds of things I was seeing, which ranged from small embroideries to canoe prows to bigger textiles, had all the stories that these big paintings had. And I was fascinated by the work of other cultures that had a very different way of describing how art works than the one that I was being fed in the colleges and the institutions, because they were all American-centric, and they were telling us that the art world, light culture, goes up and up and up, and it reaches the pinnacle somewhere in New York. Well, you know where that happened, where that is right now. But one of the things that I was lucky enough to participate in was that I did an arts education, but I also did a little bit of a literature education, and I came across two people, Helen and Chris Tiffin, who were the writers of a small book called The Empire Writes Back, which was about the way in which people who are marginal cultures, who were then colonized, borrow the language of the colonizer, whether it's English or Portuguese or Spanish or Dutch, and then they reinterpret that language and they send it back to the colonizer with inflections and differences. And pretty soon, those differences or mistakes or willful mistranslations become really energetic, if you like, creoles of the language that they are actually critiquing. So for me, that gave me a really good dose of criticality. And I started working with imagery that was going against the grain, and a lot of it was spurred on by my understanding firsthand of travelling in countries that were producing very different kinds of art forms.
And that led to your first show, didn't it?
Yeah, my first solo show was pretty well about that kind of idea. And I can remember at that time, there's not too many people in the audience who are old enough to remember, say, Ray Hughes. But a terrific gallery dealer, very strong in promoting Queensland art to the rest of the country. But my work focusing on that idea of the decorative, and more often than not, that decorative was done by women, but not solely. I mean, there are a lot of people we know today within the Asia Pacific Triennial, we understand the visual language comes in many, many forms, many kinds of traditions back them up, many kinds of intelligences, and it's often community work. But what I was interested in then, I couldn't give it quite I wasn't pinning it to theory until, say, later on, and I think we talked about this before, 1984, Griselda Pollock wrote The Subversive Stitch. So we started to see that other forms, apart from painting on canvas, could be critically grappling with these things that were in power and saying, listen, there are other ways here.
Beautiful. And what else were you reading at the time? What were you connecting your practice back to?
Well, I was reading a lot of novels because of what I was doing at uni, but then it wasn't until the 80s that theories came in a very big way. Unfortunately, a lot of that theory was written in French, translated badly, and it became like a barrier for a lot of people. I grappled with that. I did a master's, and I came to terms with what was postmodern theory. But what was happening in a much more interesting way, 20 years ahead of what was happening in visual arts, was postcolonial writing through literature. It was literature studies, I think, that was way ahead of the game back then. Now, is it still? I'm not sure. The visual arts have caught up a little, but if you bat your eye and look sideways, it's very quick to go back to the same old hierarchy again.
Can you share with us anyone over the course of your practice that has been particularly pivotal for you? Anyone that's really influenced your work?
Well, I mean, I got to say that the two people that I would single out at university or college in those days that influenced me a great deal was Betty Churcher, who a lot of you would have heard about, and Roy Churcher, her husband. Why? Because A, they were really schooled up in art history, and B, they loved art and they loved artists. But apart from them, the education experience at uni and college was pretty flat.
Why was that?
Oh, I'm going the negative. I mean, I don't know. Just lack of like a sense of urgency maybe, and the fact that it was such a small pond then, and that the dominate. You've got to remember, this is Queensland, right? And it was profoundly conservative. And if you decided to stay, you were going to have to be tough if you were an artist. You either got art or you got tough.
On that, can you share, there might be some prospective artists building careers in the audience. Can you share with us what you would see as those pivotal points in your practice over the last 5 decades of work?
Look, you know, so much of art is written in the terms of war, you know, the bellicose terms like avant-garde, going forward, or leading edge, or pivotal points. And I think that my own, I'm going to say first of all, nothing's been made. It says the making of Pat Hoffie. I don't feel I've been made yet. And the other thing is that I don't really feel that I've got a career as such. I've worked for a long time and I'm still making art, and that's something worth celebrating. So if I can move away from the idea of pivotal points where suddenly I go up and then I go up and I go up in a career, I'm going to say, now, I don't really subscribe to that kind of model. I would rather look back in my life as an artist as according to something a little bit more useful in looking at the work that I've done as a series of chapters, where you have to navigate the chapter you're in your life at that time. And each zone or each chapter could be described in terms of, say, the need to make way for other things in your life aside from the time you usually spend fully focused on art making. Now, those sorts of things you have to fit in with your art making include things like relationships or education. That takes up a lot of time. Work, family, travel. We've only got one small table in a week. How are you going to fit it all in? So it could be more useful to think about what kind of ways can you use to reinvent the kind of art you make in the way that you make it in order to help you navigate that practice according to the other things that you're having to deal with at the time. It's not all going to be like completely art or nothing like you get at college, more or less, but not completely. Can I go on a bit about that? Because I did write notes of this. You know, this is your life thing I've done in 2 months. You think and there are people in this room who'll pull me up if I lie because they've been to some of them before. Look, I just wanted to write something that might be helpful for younger artists trying to make their way through. And stop me at any point and throw your hand up and I'll listen. So during successful decades of art making, as you go along, all sorts of things are going to impinge on the way that you imagine possibilities for working as an artist. They include things like time. Now, in a very short life, there is never enough time. Grab time whenever you can get it. It's so valuable. Second one, space. There will never be enough space. So work where you can, even if it is only on the dining room table or a kitchen bench, and then blow it up later, you know, increase the size. There's always a way around it. Time, space. The third thing, responsibilities. There's always too many responsibilities. Get rid of the ones you don't need. But each of these chapters or considerations can force you to make different kinds of negotiations, and these negotiations can be really productive also. They're not all negative. You might think, oh, I don't want to work like this. And then when you finish them, you think, oh, that was actually quite good. And they do offer, they sort of bump you out of your comfort zone and often make different things that you can do as an artist.
And I think that's so important as a takeaway, even though we're just into the beginning of the session. But I think for emerging artists, career artists, at any point in your practice, to understand that there isn't this moment of achievement, which you're referring to, that there have been many chapters, and you've sat in many roles as an educator, like you've worn many hats as an arts practitioner as well.
The survival in the arts is really difficult in Australia because it's not an industry. Don't believe anybody calls it an art industry. It's a sector, and it's a very small sector, and it's not very well managed. And the fact that I'm being invited by Georgia and Tay from Artist Space to do this talk is enormous privilege to them, because they're young people who've put their shoulder to the wheel and think we need things other than just the institutions that we've got. So my whole life I have also been involved in making, I guess, the infrastructure, or contributing with other artists to make the infrastructure. Let me throw in a word of warning. You know, the funding per capita has never been so low for visual artists as it is at the moment federally. And then if you look at Brisbane in particular, because we've got one of the biggest cities in terms of spread, not only in the country but in the world, per capita from this city we get a pittance. And yet people are always so happy to jump up if they're giving a mega few bucks to a prize, like the portrait prize last Friday night. They'll jump up from Star Casino and stand in front of the person who's won the prize and say, you know, I gave a miserable, $500. Thanks. So, what I'm going to say to you is this. There is an Olympic Games coming to Queensland. If there is a time to lobby, it is now. And the visual arts is very bad at lobbying. The way you have to do that is to speak together, get together, write petitions, do things that are fun. Now, ISD Artist Space is probably the only place in this city that's actually got a centre which is run by artists in a highly professional way. We need to get moving to actually populate what the State Arts Minister is talking about will be the Cultural Olympiad. Now, we need that as a city because most of us don't even know why this city might be good. But I can tell you one reason why it's good is because of the stories involved. And until you start listening to the stories of others and how they create place and connectiveness, you will not thrive as an artist, because you need to live here for this point in time. It's no point thinking that it's better anywhere else. You have to make it better.
And on that, or for anyone in the audience who might be going, okay, great, Cultural Olympiad on the horizon. I'm an emerging artist. I'm working at my dining room table. Can you share with us, going back to your own practice, how have you negotiated scale or enhancing scale in your own practice?
Well, it goes through a couple of things. It depends. I mean, scale in itself is not important per se. I've got a show on at the moment, the Queensland Art Gallery, and it's playing with scale because I wanted to build a room that would hold the viewer in that room like that, and to make them feel as if they were part of that art. But it can work just as well on a very tiny scale. I think you can go from big to little. But let me take a step back and answer your question in another way. How do you, as an artist, develop skills to link with other artists and to make things happen? I think the first thing to do is to think about what we might need. Now, this is up for discussion, but I think what we absolutely need in this city are studio spaces for artists at a peppercorn rent. Why? Because you get artists working together with each other, things happen. The ideas will come, the shows will bleed out from that, the events, the participation, the going into other parts of the sectors of the community. But we're absolutely being bled dry on every level at the moment. So I would be lobbying very hard for studio spaces with peppercorn rents. I don't know, what do you think? Do you think that sounds feasible? Yeah.
Beautiful. Can you talk to us about what you think the role of an artist is?
Well, I did write some notes on that. I think that the role of contemporary artist includes possibilities of being a thinker. Number one, I don't say I am a painter or I am this. I like to think through things with art, through physical means. A thinker as well as a maker, an engager, a communicator, a generator of community. Sometimes we offer terms of service to build community consolidation. And these things might take place in any number of zones beyond the art gallery or the artist dealer or the artist mendicant. The artist mendicant who's always asking, can I have money please? Writing grant applications and thinking, oh, Buana, I need your money. Let me do this. I'll write it all up beforehand so you can see how good it'll be. We never know what we're going to do till we do it. It's a lie. But let's think about it in different ways. Let's also think about the possibilities of working in communities that include the relationships that you build within families, friendships, broader communities. And those broader communities might include things that are centered around things other than visual art, like music or writing, gardening, the skate scene, graffiti scene, the circus, performing scenes, the fashion industry. All of those kinds of things offer opportunities to extend the parameters of this very, very small ecosystem that we call the art world or the art sector, where we're all talking to each other. We've got to get out beyond that. But I know that you're all feeling tired. Shut up, woman, you're probably thinking. Because making these connections and bridges all requires work. But that's why it's called artwork. It takes time and resources, and it demands different kinds of skills than just the thing you're making to put on the wall.
Is that how you felt about being an artist in the beginning of your work? Has that changed at all?
I always felt that way. I think I've always been involved for a very, very long time. I spent a lot of time on boards and committees and endless. I hate committees, I hate meetings, but it became a necessity, an evil necessity to get things happening. And I can tell you something that you do not know, I bet you do not know, that we have a great national infrastructure in this country. That is galleries that are in regional galleries. We've got, for example, community art spaces. We've got, like the IMA. None of them happened because a bureaucrat decided they should happen. They were born in this country from the muzzle of artists and just hammering home, we need this. And I can tell you the history. It started in Adelaide, it grew like topsy, and then it went to the Australia Council, it became funded, then it went to the shared funding with state governments. If you see something you think needs done, you just keep it simple and go hard.
Can you share with us what you think makes for a sustainable practice? I know you've touched on it a little bit, but what does that look like for you?
Well, someone said this to me the other day, and I really had to think carefully about it, because I think sustainability is incredibly important, but it first of all starts with you. How long are you going to be able to keep this bad habit, if you like, of art up? Because it's important that you keep it up till you drop. Here's what I think you have to consider. The first thing is emotional sustainability. For example, how do I build resilience in myself in the face of the worst thing of all? Do you know what it is? Apathy. People let you do it, oh, that's nice. You couldn't give a damn. You've got to reach them back and make them look again. Yeah. Apathy in Australia is that great thing of silence. Give them the money, but don't give them your attention. The second thing that you're going to have to learn how to deal with is getting knockbacks. It happens all the time. If somebody ever said to me, you have a successful career, I'd say, come here. This is the input column. This is the results column. The results column is that much. The input column is a book long. You just got to keep going. You get knockback after knockback after knockback. And then the other thing for emotional sustainability is that wavering line, walking on that razor's edge between self-doubt and absolute swagger. Listen, I'm the best. I'm here to tell you, I've got the smarts and I've got the skills. Nobody's better than me. Fuck you. And then the next minute, you're curled up in the fetal position and saying, I should never have started, I'm a mess and I'm no good. You laugh because you know. The second thing of sustainability would be financial sustainability. Let's face it, that's massive. How am I going to be able to afford to pay for this? Now, each decision that you make on this one comes with its own particular caveat, its own price. Those who are financially successful in the art world often feel the pressure to repeat or to tweak their experimentation to fit with their dealer's expectations, or who is buying what, and should they have the same thing as they did so well with that show 3 years ago, but in pink this time. You want to make art like that? Look, it's okay if you do. Plenty do, and they do really well. I didn't want to, so, you know, I got another job. So those who want to go down the more experimental path to dream up have to dream up realistic ways of paying for their habit, paying for the rent, supporting a family if that's what you do, and just eating. So how are you going to do it? Don't feel crippled if you have to go out and get a job. You're going to have to pay the piper one way or another in such a small cultural arena that we've got. And the third one is environmental sustainability. So there's three there: emotional, financial, and environmental. Now the environmental sustainability is materials, but this is the big one as you get older and older. Where are you going to make it? And how are you going to transport it? And here's the big one: how are you going to store it? It's awful. Storage is a huge problem. Or how are you going to make it so that it can be, moved around the country much more cheaply?
Yeah, awesome. Can we talk about risk? I know Tay Haggerty, our wonderful exhibitions officer, when we were prepping for this talk, raised with you that risk is a massive part of your work. Not only is there risk in what you're talking about of just sustaining a career as an artist, but you kind of level up a bit further. You love to push not only the context of the physical display that you're working with, or the gallery or public setting commissions, but the content that you're working with often comes with risky negotiations. Can you share with us a little bit about how you approach that?
Thanks for the question. And it was Tay who pointed out to me, and I didn't actually realise it until then. And there is a through line in all the work that I've done. This one from Maribyrnong detention centre, I actually smuggled out from, this was a cell in which a 10-year-old girl hung herself in a detention centre. And to get the exact dimensions of that cell, I had to work with people on the inside, and I got an inmate to actually draw in Biral the paces around the cell. So that, in that particular exhibition was in the MCA in Sydney, and Russell Storer, who was doing the show at the time, had asked me for one that I'd done in the IMA, and I said, okay, let's go measure it up, because I'd made the box exactly to the dimension of the CVEX, which was the maritime disaster, the greatest maritime disaster in Australia. 364 people drowned in that disaster because the Prime Minister, in Operation Relax, John Howard, said, turn the boats back, the people drowned. I had made the boat into a cardboard coffin in the IMA exactly to the shape, the proportions of the CVEX hull where they packed in most of the women and children. So it was important to me that when the people looked in that hull, they thought, how could they have packed this many people in here? And then the whole thing went under. So when Russell said to me, well, we don't have a room, believe it or not, there's not a room in the MCA in Sydney that's as big as the IMA, the big main room in the IMA. And he said to me, oh, we'd have to cut a metre off it. And I said, no, the whole thing goes, you know, it's lost unless I get it precise. So then I'd gone and got the Maribyrnong dimensions and done that work. These things were groups, I did with groups of artists up on the hill at Woodford, and you know, the Woodford Folk Festival, biggest folk festival in the Southern Hemisphere. I thought there's got to be room for visual art there. They said, oh, we've got visual art here, we've got all those lanterns along the pathways, and I'm thinking, no, there's, you know, we've got different ways of doing contemporary visual art. So you would try, and in those little peepholes there, each one had a little diorama in it, and we had some absolute luminaries. That the artists, 36 artists, 1/3 of them were non-Indigenous Australians, 1/3 were Indigenous, and 1/3 were from Southeast Asia. So I had artists like Harry Dono in there, Diane Cristando, Archie Moore was in there, Megan Cope, when they were much younger, but you could peep into their little worlds. But that was risky because the rain washed everything away that year, and the whole festival site was absolutely demolished. Some of you might remember that. There was a whole program around with it, and a publication. I usually try to do a publication as well. But yes, I guess risky is something that I kind of like. I think, oh, if it's impossible, you think, yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, I don't know, it is something that's either physically impossible, or like you think nobody, no state gallery in Australia will ever put on a show about Gaza. You think, maybe.
Do you have any advice for emerging artists maybe wanting to push the boundaries themselves about how to negotiate those conversations, or how to bring themselves into that space and how to really back themselves? I mean, it is a negotiation, isn't it?
It's totally a negotiation, and there'll be times, well, I don't know, there's been plenty of times when I think it'll go so far that I'll have to quit and walk away. It goes back and forward, and often with different punters. You know, you speak to different communities, and you don't know where that line in the sand is. There's some invisible line that you draw in that sand, and you think, if I go beyond this, I am compromising my art to such an extent that I'll have to drop it, and you've got to be prepared to walk away. So in terms of responding to your question, do I have any advice? You've got to believe in what you do, and you've got to anticipate all the questions that might come at you before they come at you. And you've got to try to look around for the trip switches and how you could maybe accommodate them with the yes but.
What does the next 10 years look like for you? What's on the horizon?
You know, like, if I'm alive, it'd be a bonus. I don't plan things too much. It's just what comes up, and sometimes, you know, things are very light on. I don't exhibit necessarily to a plan at all. And then, because the most important thing, I think, is your relationship with your art. You've got to spend those long hours in the studio, but that's the best part of it. So I'm always happy to get it up on the walls. It doesn't function as art within a society until it is on the walls, but there is a lot of periods of time that you have to spend, I think. Other artists work in different ways, but I like to spend a lot of time in the studio just making the stuff.
And you spoke about it when we were preparing for this talk, about it being a relationship and it being one of the most important relationships you'll have.
It does end up being one of the most relationships apart from family, but friendships sort of get second place a lot, I guess, in terms of the time you're able to put into them. I would say, like, art is like a jealous mistress, or you could say it's like a blue healer, that if you leave them too long, they'll never come back to you. But if you're good to them, they'll stick it up, do the best stuff yet.
Beautiful. On that, we might open it to questions. Does anyone have any burning questions? None. All right, down the back. Alexandra, can I give this to you?
Thank you, Pat, for that. I just wondered, could you speak to this work? I can't stop thinking about and looking at this particular work. Could you tell us something about that?
That was a kinetic work. I did a lot of kinetic work for a while, and I was making it done in the sculpture studios. I think a lot of students would have seen it being made. So I was interested in the idea of work. That's the idea of fully exploited labour has gone through my practice as a focus for many, many years. And we talk about artwork, and we also talk about working art. So the whole notion about work in terms of labour has changed in the last 20 years. It's changing again with AI. What is work? And a lot of writers have dealt with that idea too. I think, well, I could go into that more deeply. So that work was, I retrieved a lot of old gym equipment for free from dumps and stuff, and I painted it up, and I used a lot of tit and tat, and I put it on. I think that one went on the beach at the Swell Sculpture Festival, and people could ride it, but they ended up banning them from riding it. But it was called The Gym That Got Away, and it was near the gym on the big rock there on Currumbin Beach. So it was just, I guess it was much more light-hearted work. But I'd also done a similar kinetic piece, which I'd installed. Nick Mitzovich got me to do a piece at the University of Queensland, but I don't have any pictures of that I brought in. This is a very small amount of pictures, sorry. Because this was not a show and tell, really. They're just to keep you interested while I'm live on. It's about you. It's about questions. This is about your questions and about survival in the visual arts, and if I can help in any way, shape or form. Everybody else's story is different anyway. There's no such thing as mentoring. You can only be someone's mate and help them whenever you can.
Any other questions?
Hi.
Hi.
So if you're looking at this piece here, The Gym That Got Away, and then the next one is Countdown to Midnight, so it's cool. You shift pretty dramatically from very high intensity colorways to like quite dark and like intense kind of imagery. When do you feel like those moments happen for you, and do you think it's something that people give you a little buck back for? Like, do people get upset when you make radical shifts like that?
Probably. I'm not really that interested because I'm not driven by style. I don't want to say that's a Pat Hoffie style, that is the way we trade in Australia, but it strikes me as incredibly limiting. I guess, look, here's the gig. in these colleges, they teach students to make art. And the whole way in which they teach is based on the idea of assessing something that that student has made on a white wall in a critique at the end of the semester. They have missed out two really important aspects in terms of what should be considered, in terms of students even, with regard to what they're going to need to know to survive. The second thing is creating a space or finding a space or space. So it's the object, it's the space you put it in, and it's the audience you build around it. So if I'm going to do something like a skate park, you know, a half pipe in Ipswich, it's because there is a skate culture in Ipswich and there's a bunch of kids living on the outskirts of Ipswich. You've never been there before, but I'm an artist. So there's got to be something for the people who know that that particular room corresponds to a 1926 Russian constructivist moment which turned sculpture into installation. So the art people who walk in can see one thing, but your ordinary punters are having fun on the skate deck, because we let them do it every, you know, it was a big risk for them to do that, but we had a women's team come up from, they drove up from Newcastle to do it, and the kids were in there every weekend. So yes, I chop and change, because situations chop and change. You know, and I've got that very bright saccharine thing, like minutes, you know, countdown to midnight. It's so saccharine, it could be in an ice cream parlour or, you know, a 12-year-old girl's bedroom with My Little Pony or the unicorn story. But what we're talking about is a world that's dissolving before our eyes. So it's just that sort of tension between those colours and the imagery it's depicting that makes someone say, hopefully, why? Because art is not about giving answers. It's about asking questions and somehow trying to reach people through, I always used to say, the heart, the guts, or the loins, physically, those three entry points, and then up to the head. And then hold you physically and mentally so that you're right in there with that work. But yeah, I do get given grief because I can't be bottled up for a, you know, a curator's not going to say, oh yeah, we know what she does.
Anyone else? We'll go up the back there and then I'll get you to come across to Luella after.
I wrote it down. I said, you mentioned that having an artist community is really important in building public interest. I was wondering if you had any advice for students on how we can start building that, or who we could look towards in creating more public interest in our own community, because we have interest at the art school, but we don't have interest beyond the art school.
The kinds of environments that you're moving in will be very different. Let me tell you a couple of things that I did. When I was a lecturer here, years and years ago, the Valley was dead as a dodo. And I went to the Valley Business Association. I did 2 projects with them, and one was called No Vacancies, and I put 10 installations right down the street. They weren't mine, it was all other artists. And it was very successful. Then I did another one later on called, I've got the catalogues for it. So taking over spaces, and some of them might be, you know, shops, empty shops, and they might have to be in the burbs now more than, say, somewhere like Fortitude Valley. You have to generally deal with the business owners of that and negotiate with them and say, look, we can do this. And I'll remember this, you are giving them something. Don't go like a mendicant. Don't go, oh, please give me space. Look, I've got this idea. We could get these 10 things going. We'll have lights. We'll have fabulous artwork, and we'll produce I always tend to try to produce a publication so they've got something to hand it back. The other thing I've done, I set up a kind of a festival at Fort Lytton. Now somebody's done that again lately, just more recently, but I established a relationship with, say, National Parks and Wildlife. And the National Parks and Wildlife people, I've done a few things with them, set up residencies on say, Peel Island, which is also called Takarua. I did a thing on St. Helena Island. Here's the problem that national parks and wildlife have. They want people to see the stuff, but they can't allow people on the land because they're heritage sites and they're really fragile. So if artists can bring them in at once, one event with all this other installations and things, like a 3-day event, plus talks, plus music, plus a publication, they've actually been able to then tick off public engagement for quite some time. So you've got to look at the gaps in other bits of your society to then say, we can work here. I mean, there's plenty of places out in the, like I say, the outer suburbs especially, that need re-engagement. And it might mean that you have to work with groups of people that you haven't worked with before. There was another question here.
Yeah, Alexandra, can you come to Luella? Just chuck your hand up. So, yeah, thank you.
Was that helpful?
Yeah, no, that was awesome.
Hi. You were talking about this being a great moment for advocacy, and I was wondering what you think the follow through on that looks like. Because I think artists are great at talking to each other and talking a lot about it. What does that look like in action?
You've got an arts minister who's also an education minister, and he's getting a lot of flack because from the teachers, and I think he wants to do well. And while I remain sceptical, I can't ever be cynical. You've got to believe that there's a way. So I would get together in groups, decide what you want, get someone to shape what it is you want, and put small doable ideas together, and don't just send them through, and I'm talking to myself here, and then forget it. I did it and they didn't really want it. You've got to go back to them again and again. So I would be approaching the state government, but I'd also be approaching Brisbane, because the biggest city council, biggest area, it's so underfunding the arts. Now, some of you who've got a bit of research now should find out exactly how many artists there are in Brisbane right at this moment. It could be done, and how much they get given from Brisbane City Council. I did it years and years ago and held a public forum once. And then the Goss government got in, and it really made a huge difference back then, because you've got music, you've got writers, you've got theatre, and then you've got the visual arts. Let me tell you something you already know. All of them are lobbying much, much better than visual arts, with the possible exception of printmakers. They are good at coherence.
Do we have one final? Yeah, beautiful. Let's finish off with the last question.
So speaking of education, how do we defend the university, and more specifically arts within the university?
How would I defend the university?
Arts within the university.
Yeah, from the constant cuts.
Who am I talking to when I defend them?
I suppose the university executives, or whoever else is ruling the house.
Well, I can tell you that it's been done before, and like, do you want to be specific about this university? Why?
Sure.
The Queensland College of Art is a much, much older institution than the university is, and when the university moved onto this campus here, they knew that the conservatorium, but mainly the Queensland College of Art, it wasn't the College of Art and Design, it was its, and this is what the Vice Chancellor Roy Webb used to call it, the jewels in the crown. They really valued the visual arts. But I think that what you have to do is keep advocating. And if you are paid in a tenured position, that is part of your job. You do not drop the baton. You must advocate and call them out on it every time, and you manage up. If you're in a position of leadership here, you don't just talk to your staff. You get up there on the boards and councils at the university, and you mix with the leaders in research and you show that you offer projects where you can work together with them, and you make them understand that without this place, they are much worse off. We buy them street cred. We give them community if we do it in the right way. We call on tradition, and we can conjure up a future that joins people together because they realise through visual language that we share much more together than holds us apart. And we need that more than any other thing at the moment, not only here, but in the world.
That's a beautiful note to wrap up tonight's discussion. Thank you so much, Pat, for being so generous and so thoughtful with the way that you've tailored this talk. I know we've asked at a time where you're doing many discussions, but I think this has been particularly potent for the audience in the room, and I hope you've taken a lot away from it. And on behalf of Outer Space, I'd like to extend our thanks to Angela and the Griffith Uni Art Museum team for having us here. The Craig and Carl inflatable takeover is up for a few more days, so be sure to go on the bridges and all the other places that you can find it. Ella Mae Fitzgerald's exhibition is on over at Outer Space, and there's a public program happening on the 4th of October if you'd like to join for that. So
Mine.
and yours at Quebec. If you haven't seen it, please go. It's incredible. You won't be the same after, I think is the best way to frame it. So thank you all very much for being here, and have a lovely night.
Thank you, Georgia. Thank you for coming. Thanks for your questions.